Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel. Watching over the truth in the news. Today's date is the 27th of May, the early hours, 2014. Welcome to all listeners. Great to have you listening to Truth Sentinel. You're most welcome. I hope you stay with us and listen to any back episodes. And we've got a nice long episode for you today. Bit of a bumper episode because we're tackling quite a big topic, which is religion. Today's news. Elliot Rodger, son of Hunger Games assistant director, who had recently been interviewed by police after his parents were worried about his behaviour, went on the rampage, killing 7 people at last count. Has injured more. 3 of them he killed with a knife. I'm sure this will be used by gun control activists anyway, though. Confectionery tycoon Petro Poroshenko has won a victory in Ukraine's presidential election. He's well known because of his Roshen chocolate, which I've actually tasted. It's very nice. So if that's anything to go by, then the future could look a bit more positive. I think Yulia Tymoshenko came a distant second. Pope Francis is on a tour of the Middle East at the moment, and he's been trying to stay out of politics, but not trying very well by the looks of it, because he's been sort of being involved in politics anyway. But basically, it looks like he's trying to aim for a bit of peace anyway. Speaking in Bethlehem, the Pope invited the Israeli and Palestinian presidents to the Vatican to pray for peace. So that's always a good sign. I had to mention some of the stupidity of the laws over here in the UK on today's episode. Probably influenced by the European Parliament, but according to the Daily Mail, 18 criminals who were on the run after escaping from prison in the UK had their identities protected from the media, as it would infringe their personal data rights. That's just an example of some of the crazy laws we've had over here. This week's news, Thailand's military has announced it was taking control of the government and suspended the constitution. That's a fairly regular occurrence in Thailand these days. I remember some years ago I was there and they did exactly the same thing then. But it follows months of political turmoil in Thailand. Let's hope for peace there. I'm planning to go there in maybe 2 or 3 months actually, so we may be able to do some reports from Thailand, see how things are getting on there. I would imagine as a tourist over there at the moment that they would probably notice almost nothing. Despite you've probably heard the reports of curfews. I remember I was there before when there was a coup, and it doesn't really affect people who are over there travelling. It didn't affect me last time anyway. Everything continued as normal. A roundup of last episodes. Last episode we had a nice chat with John Gary. Really enjoyed talking to him about world events. Sometimes it's nice to get someone on and just have a normal, just relaxed chat. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you haven't heard it, just make a cup of tea, relax, sit down, and listen to that. It's just a nice, relaxing chat. Okay, today's show, which is going to be longer than normal by the looks of it. I haven't quite finished making it yet, but it's looking like it's going to be more like a 2-hour show. We're going to talk about a controversial subject, a subject that brings hope, strength, peace to many, whilst unfortunately bringing war and destruction with it too, if you look at history. The subject is religion, and today we'll be focusing on Christianity, atheism, but also a little bit of Buddhism and Islam. First, we're going to go to Anthony, our academic researcher from the University of Bilkent, who will answer some of the questions on religion from an atheist point of view. Hello, Anthony.
Hi, hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Welcome back to Truth Sentinel.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be back, as always.
Good, good. How have you been?
I've been pretty well. It's been an interesting couple of weeks to be in Turkey, I must say.
Yeah, a lot of things. I heard about the mining disaster. What sort of things have been going on in Turkey?
Well, yeah, we had the summer mining disaster, which was a real tragedy. The last count I heard was about 280 fatalities, which is really, shocking and tragic. But actually, what happened here was that the tragedy turned into outrage. By the time the government got there, it had become apparent that, because of corruption and so on, the safety standards in the mine were not up to spec. And there was a protest, quite a large one, which gave rise to, I think this photograph is very famous now, that one of the PM's aides kicking a protester. Have you seen that photograph?
Yeah, I mentioned it in our last Truth Sentinel, actually, where he's kicking the guy and he's being held down by 2 soldiers. And it just makes him look ridiculous, because it's like, you can act all very tough when the guy's being held down by 2 soldiers with machine guns.
Exactly.
He's wearing a suit. It's just looks ridiculous.
So that guy was one of the PM's aides, and he was with the PM at the time, and the PM essentially told him to kick that guy. But then a video emerged that provided a little bit of background on that. Apparently it's the same guy in the video and the famous photo. So in the video, what you see is the guy boos Erdogan, and Erdogan obviously just thinks, well, I'm the PM, you don't boo me, and he just bitch slaps the guy. He literally just reaches out and slaps him overhand, which just stunned me. I mean, that's not something that I can imagine David Cameron doing, for example. Obviously, being the Prime Minister is quite a different job in Turkey.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's interesting. I mean, and this really has, I guess, stirred things up again. I don't quite know what's going to happen, but I have noticed there's been a really marked increase in the military presence in the last week. So here where we are, there are helicopters and military planes flying over us all the time now. I'm not sure what the significance of that is, but something seems to be going on. So I guess we'll talk about that a bit later as events continue unfolding. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, keep us up to date with what's going on there.
Yeah. You asked me this week if I'd like to give my views on the question of religious belief.
Yes, today's show is about religion, and I thought we could talk about. We're going to focus probably on Christianity and atheism. So, what was it you were going to sort of talk about today?
Well, I know that you're going to talk a bit later with a person of faith, so I want to give you another perspective. Just survey the field, let's say. So I'll start off by stating, I guess, what's incredibly obvious, which is that when you have an exchange of views about religious beliefs, the first question you need to answer is, does God exist? But the way these discussions tend to go is that there are also a lot of other questions surrounding that, that get bundled in. So things like where did the universe come from? How did life arise in the universe? And so on and so on. Let me say at the start that I would consider myself more or less an atheist, and by more or less I mean I find the idea of God's existence really, really unlikely. But in saying that, I mean, you'll notice that I'm hedging. I'm saying unlikely and more or less. So I'm really talking about probabilities here more than anything. Some atheists would not use those words. They feel absolutely certain that there's no God and so on. I'm personally not quite as sure as those guys. I think anything's possible. We can't rule it out. And a bit later I'll explain why I think that. But I'm saying that nothing that I've seen or heard or learned in life gives me any reason to think that the God hypothesis is an especially likely one.
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Of course, yeah.
Atheism, I think there's been some debate as to what it actually means as well. I mean, some people say it's a lack of belief in the existence of God, and some people have sort of argued, well, if you don't believe, if you're sort of saying there is no God, that's a belief in itself, So yeah. you have to define, atheism itself, really.
Yeah, and a lot of atheists are so because they have a belief in a competing hypothesis. So a scientific hypothesis, for example. And yeah, you do have quite a range of views that get kind of captured by this umbrella term. So you've got your pure atheists. You've got people like me who don't claim to know for certain, but they're fairly confident about the no God thing. And you've also got what I would call extreme atheist views. So to take an example, we could use that term, I think, about the scientist Richard Dawkins. Dawkins, you probably know, he wrote the best-selling book, The God Delusion, in 2006. And he's made a career, or a second career, I could say, out of, touring the world, poking fun at religious people, saying incredibly pompous and arrogant stuff, and generally just making a dick of himself and making all atheists look bad. So, he's not exactly the guy you want in your corner, but he does have his followers. But in terms of his outlook and his views on the world, Dawkins and people who agree with him, I would describe them as fundamentalists, because their faith in science and in specific doctrines that the scientific community holds to be true, it's very similar to the faith of, say, a fundamentalist Southern Baptist or whatever. And he actually says in The God Delusion that the question of whether God exists is a scientific question for science to solve. So he believes that science will solve this question eventually, and everyone else will have to accept the solution, because science is just so much more legitimate than any other form of inquiry or any other kind of thinking.
That's interesting, because it doesn't seem to me that science is trying to answer that question. It seems to me a lot of the time they've already felt like they've come to a conclusion on that, and that they're not actually investigating it.
I would say that there are some parts of the scientific community who are very focused on that, and their views were very fashionable. There was a wave of popular science books published in the 1990s, and so those views were very well publicized around that time. At the moment, I would say that wave has subsided, so we're not hearing so much from those people. But this view that science is going to provide all the answers, and that no other field can provide those answers, I would say that's an extreme viewpoint. That's a fundamentalist viewpoint. I'm definitely not there with that. But I wanted to make a point about religious faith generally, and why I'm not inclined towards it, or inclined towards pure atheism. See, in my view, any kind of belief about a being or a force that exists outside of our universe, it runs into a fundamental problem, which is that we can't look outside our universe. And to give you an idea of why I'm saying that, I want to use a computer metaphor. I'm actually going to talk a fair bit about computers, and I have to apologize for that, because computer metaphors are generally a bit silly. You hear people say, oh, the mind is like a computer, and I usually think I switch off at that point. But in this case, I think it's appropriate. So I want to ask you a question. Are you familiar with Flappy Bird?
Who? Flappy
Bird.
Is he a relative of Angry Bird?
I would say, actually, yeah, he's kind of a distant relative. Yeah. He's a little bird, and he stars in a game called Flappy Bird. It's a little 2D style retro game where you have to maneuver the bird through sets of pipes. He's flying along against a flat background, right? We've all played games like this. The game where you have to kind of get through walls, and you're trying to avoid hitting the walls, and there are things that you hit that will kill you and other things that will feed you, that sort of stuff.
Have you been smoking again, Anthony?
I haven't.
I thought this was a discussion on religion.
Well, it is. So this is a really simple game, right? It's extremely repetitive. It's got no evolution, no different levels. It just goes and goes and goes, and the bird just flies and flies. And it was a huge hit last year. Then something a bit strange happened. In February this year, Flappy Bird's creator, who's a Vietnamese programmer, his name is Dong Nguyen, he removed the game from Apple's App Store and from Google Play. Those are the main places where you could get hold of Flappy Bird. And he said, this is too addictive. I'm experiencing too much guilt about this, and removed the game. So suddenly it was gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can still play it on some websites, and people who had phones with the app already installed sold their phones at huge prices because it was the only way then to get the game. But basically, Flappy Bird was killed by his own creator, and his universe just winked out of existence. So I want you to imagine that you are Flappy Bird sometime before February. And
I'm having trouble getting my head around that.
Okay. You've managed to evolve consciousness. Okay, so one day you're flying along between these pipes, and you start asking yourself some existential questions, like, why is my life this way? Why do I always fly in one direction? Why am I here at all? Where are these pipes coming from? Is there someone controlling me? Who created me? And the thing is, they're all unanswerable questions for Flappy Bird. For anyone inside the game, these questions are unanswerable. Out here in our world, we can see that there's nothing especially unusual or mystical about the creation of Flappy Bird's world. You know? But Flappy Bird himself can never see that because his world is bounded. You know? So he can't answer these existential questions. And to me, that's our situation. Our world has boundaries, you know, where we exist in space-time, and sometimes you hear the expression the envelope of space-time, which I think is a pretty accurate expression. I mean, we can't suddenly jump out of it, you know, any more than Flappy Bird can just jump out of the screen and look us in the face and go, ah, it's you. We just can't do that. So it's kind of a fundamental barrier and a property of nature that we can't know how it was created. That would be my view.
I've also heard a scientist saying that we literally are living in that existence. That I remember I quite shockingly listened to this scientist, and it blew me away a bit. He was saying that at some point in the future, computer game technology will develop so much that we will be able to recreate our own universe to such an extent that it will be like reality. And he said he said basically it's probably already happened, and he said the chances of us living in a simulated world now are extremely high. And he said, in fact, he said that at some point in the future there'll be so many of these creations of the universe that the chances that we're not actually living in one now are extremely remote. He was basically saying we're living in a simulated computer game now.
And that's based on a scientific field of inquiry. There were physicists who researched extensively this idea of the universe as an information processing mechanism, and discovered that there is a lot of simulation that kind of naturally happens. Processes simulate each other, and it eventually led to this question: could we be a simulation of ourselves? I have no answer to that question. Sorry.
I wonder if there's any way to prove whether we are or not. I do remember reading that someone was trying to do that, but it would be interesting to know whether it was provable, because it's quite a scary thought to think that this is all. Maybe I think the guy was suggesting that this has all happened before. We're just reliving a print of a simulated universe that occurred before, and it's quite a scary thought, really, that we don't actually exist, a bit like Flappy Bird.
It is a bit scary, and if somebody was to try and inquire into whether we're a simulation, they could be simulating an inquiry into that which happened in the real world, which they're simulating.
Okay, I definitely need to hold on to my forehead at the moment.
Yeah. I also think an interesting little snippet of history in reference to simulations, though this is totally off topic, but doesn't matter. During the first Gulf War in 1991, the commander of the armed forces was a guy called General Norman Schwarzkopf, and he was really into military simulations, and he was simultaneously to running the war, he was also running several simulations of different military campaigns. You know? And everything that came across his desk, after a while, they created stamps so that they could mark everything that came across his desk as real-time or simulation, because up to that point, people were becoming confused as to which information was about the real war and which information was about simulated wars.
It's funny you should say that, actually, because on a coming show we're going to be doing we're going to be investigating patterns in world events. And one pattern that seems to have occurred in a lot of events, which a lot of people have picked up on, is the fact that there's been sort of simulations and drills of events that have been occurring. Like in 9/11, there was supposed to be drills occurring the same day depicting an event of planes crashing into a building. In England, but when the terrorist explosions went off here, there was supposed to be drills happening that same day. The same with the Boston bombings. So, and there was confusion as to what was the drill and what was the reality.
I've heard similar things. Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Please carry on.
That's fine. No, that's fine. So again, we can see that as soon as we ask, is there a God? You start straying into other questions, like how did the universe get started? And there's also the related question about life, as I mentioned before. So looking at the religious point of view, exponents of a religious view of the world generally use the argument by design or intelligent design. And the argument goes that if you look around the universe, you see so much order and complexity and beauty and so on, that it's logical to conclude that there's a creator. In fact, it's illogical to conclude anything else. That's the argument. And one of the trump cards in the debate is that life arose in the universe. So people of religious faith will argue that life can't arise without something, let's say, metaphysical to set it in motion or to plan its appearance, because it involves such a large amount of organization that this just couldn't happen automatically. Plus, we all know the concept of entropy, which is that things in the universe tend towards less order over time, not more. So it's important to notice with this that this intelligent design argument covers two separate points. It covers the cosmic origins, who started the universe off, and it covers the appearance of life. And it's really helpful to separate them, because they're actually separate questions. So about this idea of life arising contrary to what you'd expect in a universe with no creator, first, I think it's important to say that this word entropy has been horribly overused and misused. It doesn't apply to individual biological systems, for example, because those systems don't tend to chaos over time. That's not what entropy is meant to describe. Secondly, there's good evidence that systems can self-organize, and this is where we need to start talking about computers again, I'm afraid, because self-organization as a field of study, it goes back to the 1940s, and in 1970 there was a mathematician named John Conway who invented a zero-player game called the Game of Life. If you want to play, all you do is set up some initial conditions for a two-dimensional universe full of cells. And the cells can either be alive or dead. So you plug in your initial conditions, and you see how the cells evolve through time. And they do evolve quite dramatically. In fact, they start to self-organize into organisms. They collect together into complex organisms, which live in even more complex systems, and they evolve different strategies for surviving into future generations. But most amazingly, once they get to a certain level of complexity, they start choosing between strategies, between survival strategies. So, look, in order to make choices, you can argue there needs to be some kind of center of consciousness trying to predict the outcomes of different strategies and choosing the best one. So basically, we can see in this game societies organizing themselves and consciousness spontaneously arising.
And I just wanted to ask, wouldn't it actually sort of go down on the case of creationists who would say, well, all you're doing there is sort of saying that God's job might have been easier. He might have created a simpler universe, and then some of the bits would have got more complex later.
That's a very good point, and that goes back to what I said earlier, which is in response to this intelligent design argument, you need to look at it in two segments. One is who created the universe, or was it created, and the other one is, once it was created, how did life arise in it? Because it's life that the creationists will say proves the existence of God. Without God, there would be no life. So the point of this this game is to say, well, life doesn't need to be created per se, but it doesn't explain where the universe came from. In fact, to have a game of life universe, you need to set the initial conditions of the universe. So that would be playing the role of God. Yeah. So it only addresses the second part of the question about life, doesn't address cosmic origins.
Yeah, I mean, and I know some creationists would have a problem with the Big Bang theory, but in some ways that could that still is not a big problem with the creationist theory, and that God could have created the bang. It could have maybe been speeded up, so it wasn't over millions of years. It was just bang, everything falls into place. We've got whether Earth is the center of the universe is another question. Whether our planet is special in any way, and whether there's life on other planets, that's another show. But
yeah, indeed.
But if Earth is special, and the universe that we see around us, where we are the special part of it, and all the planets were positioned in the correct position from the Big Bang. There's so many different, like you said before, there's so many different routes we can go down in this discussion. But
I wanted to respond to your point about the Big Bang. In fact, the Big Bang fits reasonably well with some theologies. In the Middle Ages, for example, there was this idea of creation ex nihilo, creation from nothing. So in that theology, God creates everything in one go. He creates space-time and everything that occupies space and time out of nothing. And that is essentially a Big Bang scenario. So there's really no conflict there.
And what would an atheist have to say about the complexity of the universe we see around us, and of Earth itself, and the different species of animals? What's most atheist explanation for that?
An atheist would probably approach it from the point of view of evolution. Darwin's theory has been outlawed in several states of the USA. I mean to say that the teaching of Darwin's theory in schools has been outlawed or it's been in other places. The approach has been, let's present it as one of a possible range of theories and give equal weight to creationist theories, because Darwin's theory does, in some respects, threaten some Christian points of view on the world and where humans came from. The idea that we're special. In the Bible, you can find a worldview which says there's the creatures of the world, there's nature, and then there's us, an entirely different order of things, of an entirely different order of beings. Whereas Darwin's theory suggests that most of the differences between us and, say, other primates are differences of degree. They're not differences of kind. So, yeah, there is an opposition there. But atheists would say, look, when you look back through time, what you see is a gradual path of evolution, which has ended up with us and several million other species, and no God necessary for that to happen.
But what about things like I mentioned before, the sun, the moon seems to be in the perfect position. There's whole books been written on that. In fact, I read a good book recently called Who Built the Moon, written by Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. They come to a different conclusion at the end of the book, which we might even invite one of them onto the show at some point. But
yeah, that'd be wonderful. It's an intriguing book.
I mean, it basically says that if you look at the dimensions of the moon, the way it fits in with the sun, the position of it, it shouldn't be there, and it proves that there is something going on. Basically, that the universe around us, particularly the moon, shows that whether it be a creator or some other explanation, there has to be. It didn't just happen, you know. And they come up with a very way out there theory, which is I'll leave it to people to read the book anyway. It's called Who Built the Moon. So the book was written by Christopher Knight and Alan Butler, and they're basically saying that the moon is positioned exactly where it is, and it couldn't be anywhere else.
Yeah, that is very true. It's a dilemma that a number of scientists have looked at, and the name for this is the Goldilocks effect. So the idea that the universe is just right. For example, with the Big Bang Theory, if the force of gravity had been something like 0.01% weaker, then the universe would have flown off so quickly that planets wouldn't have been able to form. Stars wouldn't have been able to form. And if it had been something like 0.01% stronger, then it would have pulled the matter back into the center, and the universe wouldn't have taken its present shape. So it is definitely a dilemma for rationalists or scientific point of view.
Yeah, I would say it's a fairly compelling argument. I mean, I know I've had many discussions about this with friends, and one of my friends would say, well, but there's thousands of universes, or millions of universes even, so the chances of it not happening are pretty remote. You know, if you have enough of these things occurring and enough universes, then it's fairly likely at some point that everything's going to fall into place.
Well, that's a reasonable argument too, I think, and that's been the main argument against this Goldilocks effect. That, you know, why are we here? Why doesn't our moon crash into the Earth and kill us all? The answer is because there are billions of planets that you know, have moons, and some of them crash and destroy the planet, and some of them don't. And statistically, we're just lucky.
Well, in some ways, then people would say, well, we are special then.
True, maybe we are.
But then my friend would say, no, because there's thousands and thousands of universes, and so we're just one of many special universes which have fallen into place.
But we really are getting into territory now which proves how wacky science has become, and how science has become a faith, because this multiple universe theory is accepted now by reasonably large sections of the scientific community. And, you know, we were talking before about Flappy Bird and not being able to get out of the game to see what's happening outside. Well, I'm sorry, but to see that, gather any evidence of multiple universes, you have to get out of this one and go into other ones, and that's simply impossible.
I agree, actually. I mean, I do feel like a lot of science is based on stuff that we can't possibly know, and also I feel like about the past, a lot of the assumptions about the past seem to be based on mathematical calculations and things that we just can't. You can't really know stuff until you were there, or you can travel to other universes. You know, like I mean, it was a bit of a flippant remark, but I talked about the missing plane, and just, you know, how we can't even deal with mysteries that occurred a few weeks ago. You know, and it seems like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about that happened millions of years ago, we can't really talk about with any authority if we can't deal with stuff that's happened recently.
I think that scientific method is very powerful, but I share your cautiousness, and there are a couple of problems with scientific theories explaining the origin of the universe. So if you compare the theory of Brownian motion, which is about how fluids behave. For example, you pour cold milk into a hot cup of coffee. The milk initially sinks to the bottom, but then there's a form of motion which makes the milk swirl around and mix with the coffee, right? That's called Brownian motion. And if you're trying to understand Brownian motion, you can take 1,000,000 cups of coffee and watch one of them at a time until you've seen it so many times that you understand it. You can't do that with the Big Bang. So that's.
Are you trying to hint for another coffee break,
Andy? No. But you see what I mean. You can't repeat the experiment. You know, your theory will only ever be a theory in the sense that nobody can observe it and go, oh yeah, you're right. Look at that. So it's a big problem.
Yeah. Shall we? I mean, we could talk about this forever, as we've already acknowledged. Should we move on to another part of this, which is morals?
Yeah, let's.
And I was going to say, is it really such a bad thing for people to have some kind of faith they can believe in, such as Christianity, where they can follow a sort of moral code? Has it not sort of done any good for humanity in some ways?
Yeah, I think the question here is whether religion precedes morality, or whether it's the other way around. And religious people would obviously answer that humanity has benefited from religion because it's provided a moral compass for believers, whereas atheists would tend to say, look, morality exists as part of humanity, as part of humanism, and religion borrows it or simply tabulates moral truths that are more or less general. Yeah.
But maybe for some, I mean, if someone has a good upbringing, then they've obviously been taught morals by their parents, or maybe they've had some already existing morals. But then, not everyone. Some people grow up in an extremely different environment where maybe they've had any existing morals sort of drummed out of them, and they've been replaced with bad morals. And then, for some people, I'm thinking of maybe, say, people. Let's look at criminals in prison. There's some criminals in prisons who've turned to God or found Christianity, and I just wanted to give one example. One of the killers of the Manson murders, the killers of Sharon Tate. Are you familiar with that story?
Yeah.
One of the killers, Charles Tex Watson. He was obviously previously a brutal murderer. He's now the church minister in the prison where he is, and he's got a wife and children, and corresponds with the daughter of one of the people he murdered. And she's forgiven him. He's asked for forgiveness. He's changed his ways. Obviously, he's still incarcerated, so some people would argue, well, it's not really doing anything. But isn't that a good thing that someone's sort of he's found this new moral code which previously he obviously wasn't following?
I think that's true, but I mean it provides a good example because Charles Manson himself has become, we could say, in some respects, a conscience type figure. You can find videos of Charles Manson on the internet, for example, talking about climate change and pollution before this topic became popular. He has been exhorting the world to stop polluting itself into oblivion for decades. He is a madman, but he has true insight, and he found that, I would say, after the whole incident with the family, he's found some kind of new mission in life. You can find that, I think when people go really badly off the rails, they do need to make a turn in their lives where they put that behind them and find a better way to live. We could say a more moral way to live. Yeah? And religion is one way that some people manage to achieve that, but there are many other ways. That's the atheist point of view. You don't need to find Jesus in order to become a good person.
I think that's got to be true, or I would think that's true anyway. I mean, yeah. I've met plenty of good people who aren't Christians. In fact, I've met many people who aren't Christians who live a far more moral life, and obviously there's some Christians who don't. So yeah, it doesn't seem to be the only thing about having a faith.
Yeah.
What about things like good work, like charities and stuff, which are done by Christian communities?
I think that's I think here you need to separate the issue into grassroots believers versus the hierarchy of the church. And I think for grassroots believers, okay, the church does great things for them. It gives them a channel to, in some cases, people who are motivated to do good things. The church gives them a channel through which they can do those good things and surround themselves with other people who are equally committed to doing good things and gain, I guess, further inspiration and support from doing that. So that is a fantastic thing, obviously. That's quite different from a situation where you've got an ecclesiastical authority telling you how to live. And that's, I think, where a lot of atheists start to get annoyed, is that people are okay with others having a different belief, but when those others turn around and say, this is what you can do with your body, this is what you can't do. Or you don't share our beliefs and therefore you're an immoral person. Then atheists start to get offended. And I think that's fair enough, because I would say there are many ways to live a moral life. You don't. Different people find morality inside themselves and outside themselves in all kinds of places.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, on the same kind of vein, like there's been some criticism of religions in general, but also Christianity, about things that have happened in the past, like things like the Crusades. But
Yeah.
but couldn't it also be argued that, yeah, but those kind of events were being carried out by people who weren't really Christians? They were the hierarchy that you're talking about. These were the the people at the top who were doing these things, not people at the bottom who just wanted to follow the teachings of love your neighbor, be good to each other, whereas the people at the top were like, yeah, we're just going to send our horsemen into this city and try and enforce people on the the bequest of the Queen and we're going to kill anyone who disagrees.
Yeah, and the Crusades are just an abject lesson in just how horrible organized religion can be. I mean, you had a bishop giving a speech at Clairvaux in France to inspire the military class in the 11th century to stop fighting each other and go and fight infidels, because if they did so, they would get into heaven. Now, what actually happened in that speech was that, yes, the military class turned up, but also did a rabble of thousands and thousands of people, and they had to move the speech out of the church and onto a nearby hillside. So here's this guy saying, if you stop killing each other and go start killing infidels, your soul will be saved. And thousands of uneducated people who were in the thrall of the church at that point, because the church was so powerful, started to organize themselves, which was not what the church intended, but it was implicit in the message, like, go kill some infidels for credit with God. And then you had people's armies essentially crossing Europe and plundering as they went. There were pogroms, killing Jewish communities. There were sackings of cities, like Belgrade was sacked, for example, in the 11th century by these armies, because they were not professional soldiers. They'd never marched across the country before, and they were getting really hungry, so they started to attack other Christians. By the time they got to Constantinople, the emperor had heard that they were going to come. Alexius had heard they were going to come and barred them because they were barbarians and savages. That was before they even got to the Holy Land. They distinguished themselves as particularly savage. So that whole episode in history is an absolute nightmare, and it shows how religion can have a very destructive power. But you also have to ask, to what extent does religion create that? In the same way that you can ask, to what extent does religion make people moral, and to what extent are already moral people attracted to religion? You can also ask the opposite. Does the church encourage people to be evil, or are people with that kind of inclination attracted to bloodbaths like the Crusades that just happen to be run by the church? It's a very complex question.
It is indeed a complex question. I mean,
Yeah.
I often have problems with I might as well say it. I know that there's some of our listeners may be Catholics. I'm only criticizing the hierarchy here when about some of the things I'm saying. I don't understand some of the way that the Catholic Church is organized. When I think of the Vatican, I'm not criticizing people who follow that faith. I just don't understand it. So I'm only asking questions, really. I just don't understand why the Pope appears to be worshipped. Why hundreds of thousands of people hang on his every word, and why the Vatican Church has so much money when we have so many problems in the world. Like, for example, often on TV you see adverts saying you just need to contribute a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars to buy a mosquito net in Africa, and you'll save a child's life. And yet the Vatican could probably end that problem in one foul sweep. They've got billions. So that's what I don't understand, and I don't quite understand how people like the Pope and also, I mean, moving away from religion, people like members of the royal family allow themselves to be worshipped. Like,
Yeah, I agree.
if someone wanted to bow down to me or treated me like a deity, I would tell them to stop. But it seems like, well, you know, sometimes anyway, it seems like the Pope and the members of the royal family, they don't tell them to stop. They seem to condone this kind of behavior, and I just don't think anyone should be worshipped.
I agree, and I think if you want to look at some very nasty examples of the church as a hierarchical institution, being a force for evil in the world, the Vatican is a very good place to look. I'll give you a couple of brief examples. After World War II, we had the Nuremberg trials in Germany. Yeah, we had America and Europe's attempts to try to denazify Germany and give the Germans, I guess, a chance to turn on the most despicable Nazis and put them out of the picture in no uncertain terms. Kind of part of the nation's healing, right? You had similar genocidal actions taking place in the Balkans. You had a party ruling Croatia called the Ustashi, and they were a fascist party. They were attempting the extermination of the Serbs, and they had work camps and concentration camps and the whole box and dice. And after the war, that part of Europe really needed to go through a similar healing process to what was experienced in Germany, and it was prevented from doing so partly by the fact that the Ustashi leaders were given asylum inside the Vatican, to the point where the Ustashi insignia, which was, I believe, a gun and a sword and something else, 3 weapons all crossed, kind of like a swastika made of weapons, the insignia was present on altars while priests and cardinals were saying mass inside the Vatican after World War II. Now, that protection of war criminals had echoes decades later.
With the protection of paedophiles, do you mean?
No, I mean in the Balkans, when the conflicts in the Balkans there arose in the 90s, this fascist label started coming up again because the society there had not had a chance to heal itself after basically a bloodbath. And now in Ukraine, you're seeing similar things. You're seeing these words thrown around that demonize people because the society has not had the opportunity to heal itself after past grim episodes. And the Vatican was absolutely complicit in that. In the same way, they're complicit in the death of many African women from HIV/AIDS because they do their utmost to make condoms unavailable and to demonize the use of condoms. And that is because of a doctrinal idea that you know, contraception is against Catholic belief. Now, if you are a Catholic and you truly believe that contraception is evil, then okay, maybe that is a defensible point of view. But I find it very difficult to accept that a little piece of rubber is more evil than a command to get all of those pieces of rubber out of a community, which results in people dying.
Yeah, no, it's funny you should say that because there seems to be a lot of other occasions in the world, not just about Christianity, but about the Muslim religion and other religions, where people have a faith which they believe, which has got a very noble structural beliefs about the actual faith. But then in order to enforce it, or in order to enforce a part of it, people are prepared to kill or do something far, far worse than the actual sin they're supposed to have committed. And I'll just give a quick example, like a woman in India or Pakistan who was found to have been having an extramarital affair or just having premarital sex. Now, you can defend that if you want, but her punishment for her sin was to be raped by every member of the village leadership. I mean, it's stupid things like that. You know, I mean, that's a worst case scenario, obviously, but there does seem to be a lot of occasions where we get these things. You know, like with anti-abortionists who you know, and whether you're pro-abortion or anti-abortion, that's not the issue I'm going to talk about at the moment. But to go in and kill a doctor with a gun seems to be just as bad as anything you're trying to defend against. So everything just seems to be messed up, you know.
I agree. I think if we talk about Islam, it's a quite a different situation, because here we're talking about the differences between grassroots believers and the machinations of hierarchy. Yeah, the church hierarchy in the Christian religion. Well, if you think about it this way, governments can do things which a normal person would never get away with doing. They can do those things because they have law enforcement and the army behind them. Yeah? They're not afraid of us the way we're afraid of them. So that's why governments have more power than we do. Right? The church historically has had more power because it has had the threat of hell behind it, and at various times it's had other threats as well, martial threats. This also happens in Islamic communities. But Islam is different because it has never had a central authority like the papacy or the patriarch in Orthodox Christianity. There's never really been a Vatican of Islam. And that's got positive and negative results. One of the negative results, I suppose, is that Islam is interpreted in a wide variety of ways. I would say even wider than Christianity. And many of those interpretations mingle with the pagan beliefs that existed before Islam came to a particular region. Yeah. Also, you do have some very strongly patriarchal societies in which Islam took hold. They were always patriarchal, and then suddenly they had a religion which they could interpret to their liking to enforce the patriarchal order of that society, and it's produced some really unfortunate results, like what you're talking about there. That's just inexcusable. It doesn't matter what your religious belief is; it's just inexcusable behaviour. And if you use religion to justify that kind of behaviour, then, well, I don't know what I can say. It's horrible.
Well, it does seem to be there's a lot of cases these days of people who are using religions to carry out acts which they probably would have carried out whether they had their religion or not. They just seem to be using it as an excuse,
Yeah, that's right. There's been there was an article written a few years ago in the Express Tribune newspaper in Pakistan, analysing the phenomenon of suicide bombings, which is one that certainly that's an instance of people doing incredibly extreme things based on their faith. Or at least that's how it seems to us. That's how it's often reported in the Western media. There's very often this claim that these suicide bombers are lured by promises of virgins and all kinds of stuff. Your family will have financial stability, you'll be a martyr, and so on and so on. That does happen, but in fact, it seems to be a small minority of suicide bombings that are motivated by those kinds of extreme interpretations of jihad and other concepts in Islam. Most suicide bombings, it seems, are not surrounded by that kind of mythology. There's also the fact to bear in mind that there are a few hardline clerics in Islam who condone suicide attacks. There have been debates about the legitimacy of suicide attacks, even in the amongst Islamic academics, right? So it is out there as a concept, and not everybody. You can't say honestly that every Muslim rejects suicide attacks. That's just not true. However, the vast majority do, for a couple of reasons. One of which is that suicide is considered a sin in Islam. You cannot kill yourself in Islam. It's just not accepted. They have a completely different attitude towards suicide than what we do.
I just wanted to mention something, which is, I think this is probably true what you're saying, but I know the feeling in England sometimes is that we never hear people talking about this. If Muslims are against some of the atrocities that have happened or against suicide bombers, why aren't they coming on TV more and talking about it? It just seems like they could be a bit more vocal, and people get a bit uneasy because it's like, why is nobody saying? Why are they not actually coming out and really appalled by these atrocities? They seem a little bit too quiet for my and a lot of other people's liking, I think.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I would say that the moderate voices in Islam, which are the vast majority of voices, have not been well heard. I would say partly that would be a lack of communicative strategy on their part, and partly that would be the preference of the media for sensationalistic extreme views. But if you run it through logically, to say these guys became suicide bombers because of Islam, it just doesn't track. You look at the other suicide attacks that we've seen in the last 100 years or so, and the most famous example is the Japanese kamikazes, who obviously were not Muslims. And then the Nazis also had a planned program called Selbststopfer, which was a program of suicide attacks, and the Nazis were atheists. So you've got the Tamils in Sri Lanka, the Kurdistan Workers' Party here in Turkey. They're using suicide bombing, and because they're Muslims, it's widely reported in the media that that's the motivation. But it's pretty clear in most of those places that it's a political motivation. And also, in the case of Afghanistan, something you never hear in the media is the tribal motivation. On top of the other strife in Afghanistan, there's still a rivalry between tribes, which frequently becomes violent. And some of the suicide bombings we've seen in Afghanistan can be traced back to arguments between tribes. So it's very difficult to pinpoint this idea of does religion cause people to do horrible things. I think it sometimes does. I think sometimes people are going to do horrible things anyway, and their motives are misdiagnosed as being religious. And I also think that anybody who gets involved in an enterprise where you drive a car into a compound and blow it up, thus killing yourself and a bunch of other people, there's a lot more going on in that person's mind than just devotion to a religious system, and that needs to be taken seriously. We can't just say, oh, mad Muslim. What other factors are leading that person to be there, unlike all of the other Muslims in the community where he or she grew up? There's obviously other stuff at work.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to say also that the suicide thing can be a real big issue for I think some forms of Catholicism as well. And I remember hearing about watching a documentary about 9/11, and it was about the people who jumped from the building. And I remember they'd taken photos, and someone was trying to track down the people who were photographed falling from the Twin Towers. And this guy managed to track down a family which he thought was this guy in the photo belonged to that family, and they were saying no way. I think it was a chef or something who was working on the top, and apparently he deduced that the reason they were saying it couldn't possibly be him was because if it was, it would have gone against their religion. That means he would have jumped, and I just thought, well, you've got to give the guy some credit. I'm sure he didn't want to jump. If it was him, I'm sure it would be a case of the flames and the fire behind him gave him little choice. So I think later they admitted it was him, but this became a huge issue for them that he could have jumped through choice and thereby not go to heaven.
Yeah. See, that's the problem with fundamentalism. It's not flexible. It doesn't say, look, these are the ideals that we aspire to, but sometimes the circumstances in which you find yourself give you no choice but to make another decision.
And I think with a lot of religions, including Christianity, there's a lot of really sound principles. I mean, if you analyze most of the words of Jesus, they're fairly good. They're fairly good things. I think with those and with other things, though, a lot of things that have occurred with Christianity and other religions is that once humans get hold of a religion and they start organizing hierarchies, like you mentioned before, that's when things turn sour, because humans are useless at following decent rules. Basically, if someone godlike figure did come down to Earth and decided to live amongst us, and then said, started talking about peace, You must be good to one another, etc. It stands to reason they're going to be killed fairly quickly, I would say, because
You're reminding me of a song. The band, it's an old song. The band is and the song is called Armageddon Days Are Here Again. The line is, if the real Jesus Christ were to stand up today, he'd be gunned down cold by the CIA.
Yeah, no, it's true.
I know.
It's so true, though, isn't it? There's so much division in society with so many different opinions that people don't like people coming in and telling them to be nice to each other. You know, I remember today, actually, I saw the Pope. The Pope's on a visit to Jordan and Israel and Jerusalem, places like that.
Oh, good. I'm sure that'll help.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there's a biblical story about Jesus baptizing people in the River Jordan, and apparently later the Pope is going to be visiting the River Jordan. But there's a problem, because I think it may be the Islam religion or another religion that believes that he was on the east side of the river, not the west side, and he was baptizing or doing it had some religious significance for them on the other side of the river. And so there's a big dispute, and it just reminded me of this problem. It's like, I think, you know, people will actually go to war and start killing each other, saying, no, he was on this side of the river, no, he was on that side of the river. It's just crazy, you know.
I agree. And this is, yeah, I mean, one thing that I guess we've hinted at, but we haven't attacked directly, is another question which often comes up in debates about religion versus atheism, or however you want to frame the question. It is organized religion a bad thing? You know, separate from having faith. My feeling is that I don't have a problem with anybody having whatever faith they want to have, as long as the faith doesn't involve, you know, going out and killing people en masse.
No, and I think I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah, but organized religion can just involve us in things which are frightening and ludicrous. So there's a you know, a very, I think, strong distinction that needs to be made in this discussion between what people privately believe and the organizations that spring from that, and some of the fairly reprehensible things they do in the world.
True, and I think one of the ways of avoiding this situation is the same thing, really, which is what this show represents, which is to question everything.
Yeah.
And that means also, if you follow a religion which may have really noble set of rules to follow, but then your leader comes along and tells you to do something which doesn't even fit in with those noble rules, which is quite often the case, then you should question it. You know, definitely question anything which is said by a human who's just the same as you and I, living on the earth, who tells you to do something. It should always be questioned, you know.
Yes, I agree. If we go back to Islam for a moment, the Islamic tradition, you know, we know there are Sunni, there are Shia, and so on. There's also the Sufis, which are who are mystics within Islam. They've existed almost since the start, and their idea is that they don't have a relationship with God that goes through any institution. Their relationship with God is completely private. And there's a very long tradition of Sufi poetry and mystical literature and so on and so on. However, they've had a really rough time. You know, they've fallen in and out of favor depending on where they are and who's governing at the time. And there have been leaders who have tried to basically exterminate the Sufis. You know, even here at the moment in Turkey, they're tolerated in a couple of cities. Konya city in Turkey is a home of Sufism. They're tolerated there because they bring in the tourist dollars, but generally they're really not liked by the government here at all, because they basically say there's no authority greater than you apart from God. So if you're going to have a relationship with an authority, that's the only authority you need to recognize. And church hierarchies really don't like to hear that.
I was just thinking about do you know about that Baptist church that were sort of going to funerals of soldiers that had been killed during the Iraq War and stuff like that.
What are they called? West something?
Westfield Baptist Church?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
whose minister, church leader, has recently died.
Good old Fred.
I don't know who attended his funeral, but I think they actually he had no funeral because there was obviously going to be people turning up at that funeral to cause trouble. But basically, their opinion was, and you can watch documentaries about it. Like Louis Theroux had a good documentary about them.
Westboro, that's what they're called.
Yeah, Westboro Baptist Church. And they were basically, they're very, very anti-gay, you know. And to me, it seems like it doesn't matter what you think. You don't. The spirit of their church would just seem to be very full of hate. And I can't imagine that the Jesus which they profess to believe in would actually be behaving in the same way as them.
Yeah, and I don't think that he would have attained the popularity that he has if he had behaved in a similar fashion to the Westboro Baptist Church. We would never have heard of him, and they would never have heard of him if he was anything like them.
Although, like we said before, it doesn't seem like you're going to be liked by anyone anyway, because you know Jesus was supposed to have gone around being good, saying good things, and he ended up being killed as well. So, what is the actual answer?
Well, the answer to that is never believe anybody who tells you that the Jews killed Jesus, because they didn't. It was a political murder. And if you look at the history of the Catholic Church, there was a deliberate decision made at a certain point that the doctrine was going to be created and put about that the Jews killed Christ. That was a deliberate decision. And it was put about, and we've seen all of the horribleness that has caused. So, you know, that's one to be knocked on the head right away. It was unfortunately, I don't remember the exact circumstances now, but it was a strategic decision made by the church. I feel that it might have had something to do with the Emperor Constantine adopting Christianity as the official religion of Rome, because under those circumstances it would be very inconvenient to say, oh yeah, Jesus, we love him, but you know, we killed him. So let's find another group we can blame. But I'm not sure, I just can't quite remember now, but I do know for certain that doctrine was made up. It never happened. So yeah, and we should always question anything which says, you know, this whole group of people are responsible for something that happened thousands of years ago. Because if we don't question those things, look what happens. You get the Holocaust.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted to say, linked to what you've said there, was depending on who you listen to, they'll come up with their own research on certain issues to do with religion. Like, you know, if you talk to a Christian, they'll come up with their, you know, people who've proved certain things and said certain things, and they'll refer to scrolls and to documents and to books. And then if you talk to someone who's, say, an atheist, they will then come up with their books and their documents and their scrolls and quote years. And this is the confusion, I think, not only with religion, with everything, which leaves me very confused about everything, because it's just like, well, yeah, but you know, people tend to pick books and quotations and sources which fit their already existing beliefs.
They absolutely do, and sometimes it's understandable. Sometimes it's not pleasant to read the views of people who you think are morons. You know, I wouldn't. This is a terribly cruel thing to say. I'm very engaged with a number of people in Ukraine about the situation there. You know, but I'm not going to go onto the websites of either extreme ultranationalists or the Battalion of Donetsk. I'm not going to their website to hear their views, because their views just offend me, and I'd rather not have them in my day. So it's understandable. However, I think having said that, yeah, a lot of people could really benefit from you know, splitting their attention between the people who agree with what they already think and the people who have an alternate point of view.
Isn't the answer, part of the answer at least, tolerance?
Yeah.
And this seems to be the problem that I see, that there's too much intolerance towards other people's beliefs. I mean, what would an atheist say? what would an atheist problem be with a Christian, do you think? I mean, could they live alongside each other, be happy, or do you think there's ever an occasion where an atheist would be actually, they're not really atheists, they're actually anti-Christian or anti-religion?
They're antagonistic. Yes, you do get those people. Dawkins is one of them, who we mentioned at the start. As I said, he runs around just harassing religious people, and then he expects them to be gracious in response, and not all of them are, because nobody likes being harassed. But there are also people who find the stories so silly that they can't abide that. I mean, if you break down the story of Noah's Ark, it's logically ridiculous. But so what is my attitude? And like some of your favorite stories are logically ridiculous, and some of history is equally ridiculous. So it really, to me, it doesn't really matter.
Isn't reality ridiculous?
It is, yeah. And see, this is another thing which we need to understand in context. If you look at the world religions, the three religions which sprang from the Middle East, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they have fundamental differences to the others, which is that they're based on historical accounts. They are the religions of history. So they set out to prove an historical narrative which shows the existence of God. Other religions don't do that. So you'll never get in Buddhism, then this guy begat that guy begat this guy, and God said to this guy, go and release the people from Burma. But the historical narrative's not important. It's specifically important to these religions that came out of the Middle East. And I think that's unfortunate, because, in a way, the historical truth of religion is not... it doesn't really matter if some specific things were historically happened or not. It doesn't matter if Noah built a boat and put into each animal. And in fact, it's not possible, because obviously the lions and tigers would have eaten all the others. But it just doesn't matter. What matters is how does it help people in their lives? How do people who believe in it relate to each other and to the world in general? That's what really matters.
Yeah, and is there anything positive you could say from an atheist point of view towards Christianity, for example, since we're focusing on that religion at the moment?
Positive things about Christianity? Yeah, look, there are plenty. We, in Sydney, my hometown, had an organisation called the Wayside Chapel, and the Wayside Chapel did great work with people who I would say, I think they still exist, so did and does great work with people who many others in society would not be willing to put themselves out for, so prostitutes, drug addicts, and so on. There's a district in Sydney called King's Cross where the drug trade and the prostitution industry is what do they call it now? The sex industry is centred. And the Wayside Chapel do most of their work in that area, and they do excellent work for people who are often left behind by society. And they're just one example of many. So in that regard, it doesn't. Again, we can go back and argue. Are they moral because they're religious, or are they attracted to religion because they're moral, or neither? But nonetheless, I guess you can say they give people the opportunity to find an outlet for their compassionate urges, and other people's lives are greatly improved by that.
Okay, I wanted to ask you one question. Forgive me if it's a bit of a stupid question, but I thrive on asking stupid questions. We're all going to die at some point, unfortunately. When it comes to be your turn, hopefully at a very old age of 120, and you wake up after death, so you discover there is a world after death, and you wake up and you're in heaven, and you find out that the Christianity version of events was true. How would you feel? I just wondered how you would feel if you found out later this was true.
I don't think... Look, I feel that if there is a God, it's not the God of the Westboro Baptist Church. The God of the Westboro Baptist Church cannot create a productive, vibrant universe such as the one in which we live.
I think we're all agreed on that. I mean,
yeah.
That was a pretty evil family. No, they're not all evil, to be honest. I found some of obviously some of the daughters were just completely brainwashed, basically.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. But anyway, I'm obviously skeptical of religious claims in general, of supernatural claims in general, but I'm especially skeptical of the idea that if you don't believe, you'll go to hell. Because I think all the characterizations that we have of God are that he, she, it, they wants us to live a good and moral life. And so if we do that to the best of our ability, given what we know and our imperfect knowledge of the world and all that kind of stuff, then I would hope that, if it turns out there is a God, then the God will take that into account. That's all.
Okay, no, that's a good answer. So basically, you would believe that as long as you try to live life to the best of your ability, that you should make it to heaven if there is a heaven.
That's kind of the classic agnostic point of view. Like, live a good life, and then you'll be okay. So yeah, and I think given that we can't, as I said at the start, escape the envelope of space-time and see what God is like, I think that seems perhaps less of a leap than many of the other things that some religions propose to be true.
That's another thing I just wanted to. We'll probably come to a close soon, but
sure.
One thing about Christianity and some other religions too is that there's a heaven, and unfortunately also a hell. Now, if we talk about heaven, isn't it comforting? Also, very comforting for people to believe in an afterlife, and to believe that they're going to a better place. And if people lose family members, it can be very comforting to feel that they've gone to a better place. Like just on that kind of level, isn't that a really comforting thing for people?
Yes.
And do you think that is just entirely a fabrication of what people would like to believe? I mean, as an atheist, do you not feel that life is almost kind of pointless in a way? Because obviously a Christian would believe that when they die, that's not the end. There is a point to life. People aren't exactly sure what the point is, but at least when they die, they maybe go on to something better. They don't have to worry about all their loved ones dying because they've gone somewhere better or potentially somewhere worse. An atheist doesn't have that to hold on to. So is it not kind of like an existence with very little meaning?
That is a huge question that you just asked. Can
you answer it in 5 seconds?
No. I would say, okay, so first about life being meaningless. I don't feel that my life is meaningless. There are so many things about living that I love, and I know that at the moment of death, I'm going to be really pissed off because I don't want to leave. As hard as it sometimes gets, there's so much about the world that is fabulous and interesting, and enormously engaging, and I don't really need anything else. So what was the other part of the question? Is heaven a fabrication and all that sort of stuff? I don't mind if it is. I'm not. It doesn't bother me that people, if people seek comfort in that and it's true, great. If people seek comfort in that and it's not true, also great. I don't mind.
And you don't need. Would you say you don't need that kind of comfort?
No, I don't feel. I don't know. I mean, there's another part of the argument too, which is you mentioned. Some people feel that they're going to a better place, and there have been philosophers who've objected to that idea because it takes the emphasis a little bit off this place and how maybe this is the one shot we have, and therefore we ought to look after the world as best we can. All of that kind of stuff. Looking forward to an afterlife can I guess, take you a little bit out of the immediacy of being in this one.
Yeah, no, fair enough, fair enough.
It is an endlessly interesting topic, and I want to say it's only episode 14 of Truth Sentinel, yeah.
Yep.
So congratulations on going within the space of 12 episodes from does Tony Blair have inappropriate relationships with a journalist to does God exist?
Well, we hope to cover every topic on Truth Sentinel. So yeah, no, it's good that it's a good topic to tackle anyway.
Not afraid to tackle the big questions, Scott.
Absolutely not. No, and we may not always answer the questions, but we'll at least ask the questions.
Yeah.
So Anthony, thanks ever so much for giving us your views on and your research on atheism, and I hope you'll come back again in a couple of weeks maybe and talk to us.
Thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the comments of your other guest, hearing what he has to say. So cheers from me to Michael. Hello. I hope you enjoy being on the show too.
Just before we close, just to say again, and I feel like we should repeat this because we have got a lot of people listening of various different religions, that anything we've said is just our personal opinions or asking questions. We're not meaning to offend anyone who's Catholic. I know friends who are Catholics, and we're just talking about certain aspects of things, so please don't be offended.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. As I think we've been saying all along, you know, there's individual faith, which is fine, but there's a lot to analyze and a lot to talk about. But certainly none of it is meant to offend or affront anybody's beliefs.
Okay, good. And so speak to you again soon, yeah?
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. So that was a discussion on atheism, Christianity and Islam, and religion in general. Now we're going to go to our first listener to appear on Truth Sentinel, who's offered to come and speak to us all. Michael will be continuing the discussion on religion from the point of view of a Christian. He's been a Christian, I think, for more than 20 years. Michael lives on a marina, so if you hear seagulls, boats or dogs, don't be alarmed, you're not hearing things. The recording quality is not always perfect because of the internet connection, but hopefully it's not too bad. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. It's been a bit of a cloudy day here in England. Lots of dark clouds, but there's been the odd spot of sunlight, so it's been quite nice. I'm still enjoying nature out in here in the countryside. And I understand you're near a boat or near a river or something at the moment?
Yes, I'm on the island, or I should say on Whidbey Island in the Pacific Northwest, the great state of Washington. I'm in the city of Oak Harbor, and I live down at the marina on a 27-foot Alban Vega. I've got oceanfront property.
And how long have you been living there?
I've been living here for 2 years, since September 2012.
It sounds like, I mean, I'd love to live in a place like that myself, on a boat or something like that. I mean, what made you want to go and live on a boat? Is that a decision you made due to any reason, or you just you've always liked the sea?
Oh, it's definitely for a reason. My thoughts about it were that okay, if everything's crumbling in the country, and I was just laid off in July of 2012. I wanted to hook up with my dad, who's a Navy veteran. He was stationed right here at Oak Harbor as a jet engine mechanic, and he retired here. So I decided to come out here, and in the back of my mind, I thought I should get a sailboat, and when the zombie apocalypse happens, I can always hop on the boat and sail off.
How fast does this boat go?
Oh, it's probably going to average about 4 knots.
Okay, so it should be fast enough to get away from the zombies then. I was just worried that you would pull away too slowly.
Well, it has an 18 horsepower diesel engine.
Okay, good.
That's
cool. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I grew up on Maui. I was indoctrinated into the religion of Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism. your typical Honganji type of Buddhism. My parents didn't attend, but they sent me every Sunday. It's an interesting religion. I probably didn't really believe in it too much, but it's more of a philosophy than a philosophy for life than a real religion, I think.
So what age were you when you were a Buddhist?
Oh, probably from age 6 to about 12.
So were you more a Buddhist because of your parents were into that, or were you consciously a Buddhist for your own choice, do you think?
I was not consciously a Buddhist. I was just sent to Buddhist church.
Actually, Buddhism has quite a good reputation amongst a lot of people for being a very peaceful religion, and generally doesn't cause too many problems around the world, or hasn't seemed to.
It's a golden rule type of philosophy religion, that if you do what's right and you think what's right, in the end you will be moved up into the hierarchy of greater things after your death.
Has it got the same sort of concept as heaven and hell as Christianity?
It sort of does. They do believe in a Buddhist heaven, which is their nirvana, but their hell is more of a returning to this world in your reincarnation. So basically, if you don't live the right kind of life and you don't advance, you're reincarnated back into this world of suffering.
Okay, so this is hell that we're living in.
Basically, and we are at the top of the food chain. So we must have done something right when we were dogs.
Oh, that's good. That's some good news. And are your parents still Buddhists?
No, my mother, she's now Christian, and she used to be this Buddhist religion, and later she took on a different, more culty Buddhist religion called Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism, and their focus wasn't so much attaining enlightenment as it was to attain things here on this earth, and they believed in saying or doing their meditation and saying the secret word, basically, that unlocks the desires of this world.
Oh.
And so I went with her to that for a few months.
So, Michael, why did you move from Buddhism to Christianity?
Well, I was living my life and trying to find some sort of meaning to the whole life experience. And what I was interested in was leading a normal life like everybody else. And after a long tour in Germany in the 56th Field Artillery, I had moved to Alabama on my next duty assignment, and I came across a young lady, and she invited me to go with her to her church. And of course, I wanted to know, is there a God? I didn't have much faith in Jesus or Christian churches for that matter, but I said I'd give it a try and have a look into it. And I began going to the church with this nice young lady. And I was surprised because after I was baptized a few weeks later, I had a supernatural experience. One day, this young lady and I, we were walking. It was probably early summer. We're walking together and discussing the meaning of life and the spirituality associated with Christianity. And she mentioned to me that we're living in the end times, that Jesus will return soon. And as we were discussing this whole 9 yards, we both looked up and there was an aurora borealis overhead in the middle of the day in Alabama. Well, this was that time in 1989 when there was a major solar activity that I hear knocked out the Niagara grid. And just thinking about that instance in time is another reaffirmation for me that there is a higher power. I do believe that Jesus Christ came to bring us and to teach us, to bring us to him and to teach us about what he's expecting of us.
And do you think someone who doesn't believe in God or doesn't follow Jesus still could have good morals, or do you think Christianity provides those morals?
Oh, most definitely. The role Jesus Christ plays is he is the sacrifice that God requires to bridge the gap between humans and the divine. And in essence, he becomes then the judge. So God the Father and his Son Jesus and the Spirit are all one entity, and yet in three distinct forms. Jesus then fulfills the sacrifice called on for Abraham and Isaac. That was a test back in the old times, and then God fulfilled it by sending his Son to be sacrificed.
So people's sins could be forgiven?
That's correct.
Some people I've heard have said that the problem with Christianity is that if all your sins can be forgiven, then what's to stop someone just continually sinning and then just keep asking for forgiveness?
Your heart. Are you really sincerely penitent? If it's some sort of behavior that you're sorry about and you ask for forgiveness, do you repeat that same behavior or negative, or let's say it's adultery? Most of what it seems that God requires of us are common sense, positive, moral values, such as thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder, love thy neighbor. If you're not doing those things and are willfully not doing those things, would you really ask for forgiveness and then repeat those behaviors if you were truly penitent? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, you mean basically that God knows whether you're really sorry or not, because he can kind of read people's minds in some ways.
Right. At the same time, there's some behaviors, let's say, okay, here's one that I've been tossing about in my mind. In the Old Testament, it talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, and that gay sex is an abomination to God. Okay, but you have these people that aren't attracted to the opposite sex. Of course, it's hard for me to fathom it, but let's say heterosexual sex was an abomination to God. Then what would human beings do? At least regular heterosexual human beings. We would be faced with quite a dilemma.
Have to stay indoors with the doors locked.
Yes. And what is the essence of love And when we think deeply about it, it's not necessarily the sex. The sex is just kind of something that evolves to in the relationship, and that leads to having children and a family. But on the animalistic side, it's a drive within us. Now, homosexuals can't have children, so their sexual activities don't ever lead to procreation, yet it might be an expression of love. And even St. Paul, I believe, said that love covers a multitude of sins. So I think in the end, we have to leave the judgment of people's actions to the higher authority, to Jesus. Let him be the judge. Why people did what they did.
Yeah, I mean, if someone's led a good life and been kind to everyone and tried to avoid sin as much as possible, but isn't actually a Christian, do you think they could still go to heaven?
I think that that's Jesus' choice. He has to judge. And when people are called to the judgment day, they'll go before him, and he'll look at his book, and their names will either be there or not, depending upon their, not necessarily their works, but maybe their testimony before him at that time.
What do you think is the meaning of life, the purpose for people down here on earth from a Christian point of view?
From a Christian point of view, I think it's pretty much the same as the Buddhist point of view. Do your best. Understand that it's only temporary. Learn as much as you can. Try to understand, explore. It's kind of like a big playground. And in the end, God wants to pick out the best fruit from the playground. He doesn't want the rotten ones that try to roll over all the other ones. What he's looking for is that choice cut.
Do you mean like people should be striving for perfection?
Not necessarily perfection, but I do believe that he's looking for a good crop. Not necessarily just for the most perfect blades of grass, but for a good harvest.
Why do you think it's necessary to believe in God and to believe in Jesus, which seems to be a requirement of the Christian faith to get to heaven?
Well, if it's true that let's take this back 2,000 years. Jesus came to fulfill prophecies that were laid out by prophets of God for Israel. And I believe that God understood that what would occur, that some of the people would accept and other people would not. And generally the ones who accepted were your average everyday person who probably was struggling a lot back then. And then the people in power who were basically oppressing the people through their power in the Roman establishment, and those who basically were looking for power wanted to hold on to that power and therefore rejected the Messiah.
What would you say to people who say there is no God? What's the evidence for you that there is a God?
I can understand why they would say that there is no God. Just from observation, you don't really see any real reason to believe in a God. But when you, I suppose, surrender that disbelief and take a leap of faith and say, okay, I'm going to learn about this religion and open my heart up to it, and ask for some sort of confirmation that there is, then there might be a revealing for people. There could be people who have tried, and there may not be a God. But from my situation, I asked the question and I got a answer, and therefore I believe.
Talking about asking questions and getting answers, a lot of people, I think, feel like if they pray to God, they don't get any answers back. It's sort of like talking to yourself almost. It requires a lot of faith. Do you ever feel like you do get definite answers to prayer, or how do you think people can communicate with God?
I completely agree with that statement. God answers in very subtle ways. For one instance, I always talk about the aurora borealis, a confirmation that he exists, because at that very moment we saw something occur. Throughout history, people believe in ghosts. I've never seen a ghost, but do I believe that there are ghosts? I do know that when my grandmother passed away, I woke up in the middle of the night in Germany, and I just knew that she had gone. And I didn't confirm that until probably 6 months later, when I got out of the military and went to go visit her, that she had passed away. But I knew that something bad had happened to her, and that she had left us. Some things are very coincidental. You could say that, oh, the aurora borealis, that was just a coincidence. But coincidences are like lightning. They don't strike, over and over repeatedly, unless there is something behind it.
But why can't God just communicate freely with people, do you think?
I don't think he wants to. I don't think he wants to. He wants to leave, for some reason, us to make a leap of faith. Of course, it doesn't make any sense. You would expect the normal, rational thing to do is to hover up in the sky on a cloud of a kingdom castle cloud, and point fingers at people and say you're doing the wrong thing, and zap them with lightning, such sort of thing. But maybe it's in his plan somehow that we all have to make an effort and a leap of faith.
Do you feel like, well, I know a lot of people feel like a lot of people become Christians because they've maybe reached a low point in their life. People are just needing someone to comfort them, and they don't have anyone there, so they like to believe that someone's listening.
That definitely could be a very good reason, and a lot of people that I've come across, seems like the converts, a lot of them converted for that reason, that they were looking for some sort of spiritual guidance, and that they were looking for comfort. This girlfriend of mine that I spoke about, while she was in the military, she was so miserable that for a period of time she was strung out on heavy drugs, heroin and other things, and she was completely out of control. And when she finally bended her knee and accepted God, she changed. She went from basically demon to saint. And I hear those stories a lot. You can just listen to Steve Quayle. Steve Quayle will say the same. Now, I personally have never had any trouble. I've always striven to be on the right side of everything. So I don't have that kind of testimony. But I can definitely say that I asked the question, is there a God? And I got an answer. And therefore I followed.
And you mean Steve Quayle, who's often on Hagman and Hagman?
Yes. Mm-hmm. His testimony, he was a drunken biker for a while, a real hellraiser.
So you think that Christianity can change people's lives around and can be a good force for good in people's lives in general?
Yes, definitely. And it takes a lot. I think it takes something supernatural to actually change people, especially that dramatic.
One question a lot of people would ask a Christian and maybe other people with other religions as well is, why does God allow so much suffering to happen on the earth and doesn't sort of try to stop some of it?
Again, I want to point out that this world is just temporary, that the life that we're leading here is kind of like a training ground, a school, a chance to experience things. And there are experiences in life, and depending upon the different degrees, suffering is definitely one of the experiences that we all have. Some people suffer from different diseases, other people suffer from loved ones being lost. This life is just a drop in the bucket. God allows a lot of the suffering to happen for our benefit.
Does Christianity, just to change the subject quite a bit, does Christianity fit in with evolution?
Well, I want to say that evolution is just a theory. Okay? It makes sense, but nobody really knows the truth yet. I see that people are different than the animals. Although, our bodies are similar, there's something different about people.
And do you think there's something special about our planet as well? Are we the center of the universe, or as some people argue that there's many universes and we're not particularly special, and that although our planet and all life on this planet seems very complex, if there's thousands of universes, then it could just be some cosmic accident.
Sure. And well, nobody really knows, but if we think of everything outside of us as being infinite, and infinite universes, infinite space, infinite time, then where is the center of the universe? Well, I must be the center of the universe, because everywhere I look, it's infinity outwards. And this comes back to some of Descartes' thinking. I know I'm real, but what about you? Are you?
Not sure, to be honest.
Are you more than an algorithm?
I believe so, but yeah, we actually spoke about that before. That one scientist had said that he actually said it was probable we're living in a simulation of a past world that did exist, and that we're just a simulation. Because he said that in the future, computer game technology and simulation technology will become so advanced that we'll be able to create copies of the universe and how it existed.
He's speculating, as we all speculate, and who really knows the truth? I'd like to hear what the Illuminati think with their Anubis statues.
If they exist, of course.
Yes, if they exist.
And this is part of the problem, is like knowing what the actual truth is. I mean, for example, there's a lot of researchers I've heard about that say Jesus was not the person depicted in the Bible, and that even things like the Ten Commandments, they came from another religion that predated Christianity, and that some of the ideas from Christianity have just been borrowed and it's basically been fabricated. What do you say to the people that base their ideas on this kind of research?
I would say, hey, I'm a skeptic too. Show me the evidence, I'll think about it, and maybe I'll pray about it, and I'll see what happens. Maybe I'll get a coincidence that will change my mind.
I mean, if someone wants to present the evidence, it's probably going to be in the form of books and quotations, and they'll back it up with bibliographies of scholars and things like that. How do we know which is the correct version of events? Because you can read a book which will scientifically say Christianity is correct, and all the scholarship and academic research is all sound, and that things haven't changed too much from the original texts. And then you can read another book will say that it's all nonsense, it's all been fabricated. So how does anyone know what to believe?
Right, that's a good question. I would say that if there truly is a God, he'll try to lead you and make a confirmation for you in some way or form. Now, let's say I wanted to worship Thor, and I made a proclamation to Thor, and then lightning struck. That would be probably enough for me to say, yes, I'm going down the right path. I think it's up to the individual and the path that he's following to find truth. And it may not necessarily be true. I'm not going to say that Thor is untrue, because I don't know. I haven't gone down that path, but definitely I am convinced that Jesus Christ is the Son of God.
How about the Bible itself? Do you take it literally? I mean, was the earth created in 7 days, and was there a worldwide flood with a guy called Noah who put all the animals onto the ark?
I don't know, but I will take it literal, just for the sake of it. But I understand that there could be some artistic license in it.
And who created God?
Aha! I don't think anybody created God. He just was. Of course, I don't know.
I just thought I'd ask in case you did. In case you did know.
No.
How do you feel about the difference between the Old and the New Testaments? Now, there seems to be a lot of death and destruction involving armies destroying cities and non-believers in the Old Testament, and cutting off of limbs and things like that if people steal things, which is still practiced in some countries such as Saudi Arabia. It doesn't seem to fit in with the New Testament, with Jesus saying love one another. How do you account for that?
Yeah, that's a pretty tough question, Scott. In the Old Testament, you look at the narrative, and a lot occurs under the guidance of Moses. The Mosaic laws, and the dietary laws, and the stoning of sinners. I'm not too fond of a lot of those concepts, but I think at that time they used harsh punishments for basically crimes against God and different sins. I don't necessarily agree with them, but at the same time, that was the case, that the laws were set down.
Do you think it's necessary to believe and understand everything in the Bible to be a Christian? I mean, do you have a lot of questions yourself about Christianity?
No, I don't believe that you have to believe everything or to know everything. One of the curses of being an intelligent person and a wondering person is that you do go out and learn and just not blindly believe. Like the most humble people, and I think the most blessed people are the simplest. The simplest people that to a lot of people don't, are just dullards, blindly believe things. When it comes to Christianity, they're probably blessed, and that they just blindly believe that the earth was definitely created in 7 days. And they don't question; they just believe, just because maybe they don't think very much.
Doesn't it then make it very difficult to believe things in the Bible if you're not sure what's true and what's literal, what's not literal?
I'm not so concerned about some of those things. Some of it has artistic license.
Fine, yeah. No, I wanted to move on to talk about the Catholic religion. Basically, you know,
Yes.
Jesus talks about, you know, giving all your money to the poor and being good to one another and being humble. And sometimes when you look at the Catholic Church, the Vatican in particular, and the Pope, it doesn't seem to reflect some of the teachings of Jesus, for example, like with the Vatican owning hundreds of millions, I think even billions of dollars.
I agree.
You know, where they could probably end, say, you know, things like malaria in Africa in one foul swoop with some of the money they've got. The Pope seems to allow people to almost worship him in the hundreds of thousands, and sometimes when I see them all gathered listening to the Pope, there's very little mention of Jesus. What do you feel about that?
Yes, I would tend to agree. There has been much corruption within the Catholic Church, dating back 1,000 years. If you sit and study history, the original church began after Constantine, and you could say that the Orthodox are probably carrying on the faith better than the Catholic Church. At the same time, whenever anything gets organized to a point, you get the corrupt figures within the system, and they start amassing wealth and basic human desires, treasures, and selfishness and greed. And this hasn't escaped the Catholic Church at all. It escapes individual Christians, but not the mechanism. The mechanism is turned into basically a monarchy, where these so-called Christian leaders fight amongst themselves to see who's going to become the king, and that's not very Christian.
Indeed. Should people fear death if they're not Christian?
No, I don't believe so. I believe that Jesus will judge us on our souls, our hearts and our souls. Just as if an unbeliever would come before Jesus and after he passed away on Judgment Day, Jesus would look at the man, and just like while he was on the cross, there were two thieves next to him. One thief ridiculed Jesus and said, "If you be the Son of God, then take yourself off the tree." And the other thief said to him, when you come into your kingdom, remember me. And that was the first man that was saved by Jesus, I do believe, one of the two murdering thieves. He repented right there and then on the cross because he had a good heart.
Christians believe there's going to be a rapture when Jesus comes back and people are taken up into heaven. Do you believe that, and do you know when it's going to happen?
I do not believe in the rapture. I do believe in suffering. I believe that we should suffer just as much as Jesus suffered, and we can expect it.
What kind of suffering do you mean, sorry?
I mean that our leader was crucified and underwent a lot of torture on his last day. We should expect the same. And if we do not get the same, then we were blessed. But we can expect to walk in our God's footsteps.
Do you think if you're a Christian, it's compatible with other religions? I mean, is it possible for a Christian to be friends with Muslims and with Jewish people, for example?
Of course, yes. While I was working in the pharmaceutical field, I had several Muslim friends. Unfortunately, although I did know a couple of Jewish people, they weren't as easy to talk to about their faith because a lot of them didn't know anything about their faith. But as far as Muslims, their philosophy and their religion is very similar to Christianity, except that there is a God and Muhammad is his prophet, and Jesus was just a prophet as well, but not as important as Muhammad. So that's my understanding of the Muslim faith. But I believe it's a beautiful religion.
Do you think that Islam and the Muslim religion is less tolerant than, say, the Christian religion?
I see that there's extremists in both religions. On one hand, we had Catholics that would burn heretics at the stake. They burned St. Joan of Arc for being a witch. As anything that threatens the power structure is going to, that power structure is going to convince other people to do bad things, basically.
As we're coming to the end, do you believe we're living in the end times at the moment?
I do. But at the same time, the end times are at hand for each and every one of us. No matter where you go in the world, the different people that you meet, you'll find about the same thing. We're all living here. We're all trying to figure out what's going on. We're all very similar. Whether or not it's the end times as forecast by St. John is irrelevant, because the end time could come at any moment for you or I or anybody that you look at. I just live a few miles from where that big mudslide occurred here in Washington that wiped out about 40 people. And all over the world, people are their lives are ending here on in this existence. Game over, basically, in the video game term.
Yeah, so for some people, for each and every one of us, there's going to be an end time at some point, I guess. How about Revelations and the mark of the beast? Do you think that's all going to happen?
I think it's very possible that in order to buy or sell, we're going to have to take the mark of the beast here shortly. I myself will not, and I expect to be FEMA camp.
I heard about these FEMA camps that are being built or have already been built in the States. Is there a lot of fear about that amongst people? Not from the average citizen that's unaware that their government is capable of bringing down buildings and blaming it on other people, just to perpetuate the system that they've created. But basically, you're ready to escape on your boat should something big happen, yeah? Sure. If I feel the need to leave, I can leave, and I like that feeling of freedom. That's the most important part that I cherish, is my freedom. So where would you head to? I would head to the middle of the Pacific. I'd let God take the helm So thanks for coming on, Michael, and telling us what it's like to be a Christian and your views on Christianity. So we're very grateful for you coming on and sharing that with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Scott. I was able to, well, I hope I was able to help people and try something new and try to learn something new.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think there's been a lot of information you've given us, and I hope you'll come back again soon at some point.
Sure, anytime.
Take it easy, have a good rest of the day, and speak to you again.
Yes, thanks, Scott. Have a great day.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
So it was good to hear from Michael. And remember, if there's something you would like to come on and talk about, drop us an email, scottsentinel9@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can get you on. Also, don't forget to come and say hi to us on Facebook or Twitter. Look for Scott Sentinel or Truth Sentinel. Topics coming up in future episodes could include enemies of the state, Hollywood secrets, mysterious celebrity deaths, planned obsolescence. We might even do a show on food, health, and a lot more. Give us if you've got any ideas, just leave some comments in the comments section of YouTube. This is the section where we normally talk about if there's any news to do with economic markets, sports, space, or weather. I just noticed there was an article saying there was drones over the Champions League final, watching over the crowd. That was in the Champions League final, soccer or football if you're in the UK. I think this is going to become more and more common to have drones flying around. I think they're just getting us used to them. And this technology is going to change so much in the next 30 years. I don't think it'll be long before spider-like drones like those in the Minority Report will come walking into your room just to check you're not up to anything. And people think that's nonsense, but we're living in a sci-fi world now where we've got this kind of technology. It's not going to be long before they use it. I think George Orwell's 1984 was a kind of like a blueprint for the future. Anyway, there does seem to be a correlation with the concept of sport and government control. You look at the days of the gladiators when people were fed to the lions. I bet if that still continued to this day, then a few whistleblowers would find themselves staring into the jaws of a lion. If you are a whistleblower, before this happens, before we return to the days of the gladiators, come on Truth Sentinel and tell us what you know. To finish today, as it's been quite a long episode, I'm sort of going to finish fairly quickly. Just want to say Albert Einstein, I came across an Albert Einstein quote this week: blind belief in authority is the greatest enemy of truth. I was thinking of printing some Truth Sentinel t-shirts with that quote on it, and maybe other quotes similar. Let me know if you'd be interested in those. That's one thing we could start selling on here. I don't want this channel to be about making money too much, but we do need to try to fund the show a little bit. So if you'd be interested in t-shirts, let me know what you think about that. Also, if you'd like to advertise on here, if it's something that fits in with the ethos of Truth Sentinel, then let us know. So any sponsors, advertisers, people who'd like to finance the show, please get in contact, scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening today. Catch you later. Goodbye.